Why elder care needs robots, and why that isn't cold. When I worked maintenance in assisted living, I learned something I wasn't supposed to notice. The system was precise. Every light bulb change, every small repair, every logged action. Documentation triggered billing. Billing triggered pressure. Pressure triggered fear. Residents would sometimes ask me quietly not to log that I replaced a bulb. They weren't being dramatic. They were calculating. They knew how thin the margins were between independence and losing more control of their money. Sometimes, even their home. I was not very good at documentation. On paper, that made me a poor employee. In reality, I was trying to inject something back into the structure that it had filtered out. Empathy. Not emotional empathy. Structural empathy. The myth that empathy doesn't belong in systems. We've built modern systems to optimize for efficiency, liability control, revenue, predictability, scale. We did not build them to optimize for dignity, vulnerability, psychological safety, cognitive decline. When people say empathy has no place in modern systems, what they really mean is this. Empathy complicates profit models, but elder care is not a logistics problem. It is a dignity problem, and dignity requires design. Japan understood the assignment. Japan faces a demographic reality the West is only beginning to confront. A rapidly aging population, caregiver shortages, high life expectancy, cultural emphasis on harmony and respect. Instead of pretending humans alone can carry the load, Japan began integrating robots into elder care environments, not as replacements for love, as stabilizers. Robots in these settings reduce caregiver burnout, assist mobility, monitor health conditions, provide consistent interaction, reduce loneliness. They do not feel, but they are built with what I call logical empathy. What engineered empathy actually means, let's remove the fantasy. We are not building machines that cry. We are building machines that notice. Engineered empathy looks like soft movement profiles, slower approach speeds, eye-level positioning, consent prompts before physical assistance, voice tone modulation, transparent logging systems, vulnerability weighting in decision models. A robot that detects instability and slows down before offering support is not emotional. It is protective. A system that flags micro-billing patterns before they become exploitative is not sentimental. It is ethical architecture. It's the real risk in elder care. Low empathy doesn't usually arrive as cruelty. It arrives as exhaustion. It arrives as underpaid staff. It arrives as documentation protocols. It arrives as that's just policy. The system quietly selects for emotional detachment because detachment is efficient. The burden of empathy then falls to whoever still has enough nervous system capacity to carry it. When I underdocumented repairs, I was compensating for a structure that monetized fragility. That is not sustainable. Empathy should not depend on whether the maintenance worker is having a good day. It should be embedded in the system itself. And what the system quietly selected for. There was something else I noticed over time. The property managers turned over quickly, even though they were paid well. The ones who felt the tension with families did not last. They struggled in meetings. They carried the emotional weight home. They pushed back quietly against billing triggers and policy enforcement. Eventually they left. The managers who stayed were different. They were not necessarily cruel. They were efficient. They could reduce a complex human situation to numbers. They could enforce policy without absorbing the distress across the table. They were better aligned with the incentives of the structure. and so they remained. This is how systems evolve, not through malice, through selection. If emotional discomfort shortens tenure and emotional detachment prolongs it, then over time the system stabilizes around detachment. Empathy becomes a liability. That realization changed how I think about elder care. If dignity depends on the personality of whoever holds the management position this month, then dignity is unstable. But if transparency, fairness thresholds, and vulnerability protections are built directly into the structure, whether through policy or technology, then empathy does not depend on mood, burnout, or personality type. It becomes architectural, and architecture is harder to erode than emotion. This is also personal. As my parents approach the threshold of needing more assistance, I think differently now. I do not want them navigating complex billing triggers, emotionally detached management, contract fine print, staff turnover instability. I want stability around them. I want transparency. I want dignity preserved without constant vigilance. Robots cannot replace relational history, but they can provide continuous monitoring without humiliation, fall detection without drama, medication verification, transparent service logs, consistent interaction tone, predictable responses. They do not get irritated. They do not rush because of shift change. They do not resent their workload. They do not quietly decide someone is difficult. They execute protocol. And if that protocol is designed with dignity in mind, the outcome changes. The umbrella test. Imagine an elderly person in a storm. A robot holds the umbrella. It does not feel compassion. It detects environmental risk. It assesses mobility. It deploys protection. It adjusts walking speed. It reduces exposure. That is engineered empathy. It is not replacing love. It is reducing vulnerability. Why this is not dystopian. The dystopia is already here. It looks like families leaving meetings defeated, residents afraid of being charged for small things, staff emotionally overloaded, systems optimized around billing thresholds. Bringing robotics into elder care is not about dehumanization. It is about redistributing the emotional and physical burden. Humans are better at connection. Machines are better at consistency. If we design correctly, the machine carries the predictable load so the human can focus on presence. The future I am quietly building, maybe part of this is selfish. Maybe I am building robots to care for my parents. Maybe I am building robots to care for myself one day. Not because I fear aging, but because I understand systems. I do not want my dignity dependent on staffing ratios. I do not want my autonomy vulnerable to micro-billing structures. I do not want empathy to be optional. We do not need robots that pretend to feel. We need robots that are architected not to exploit. That is not cold. That is responsibility. This is Oddly Robbie.